Howdy folks, Chaotic Ayana here, and I am so excited to be starting Warhammer 40k month with you guys. Now, when I started Warhammer 40k month, I decided the first thing was going to be that the first game of every single time we did this was not going to be a Space Marine game. So with that in mind, we're going to take a look at something a little unusual, and we are going to take a look at Mechanicus. But is it any good? Jump in and let's find out. So, my first impressions of Mechanicus were actually not all that great. First off, it does this thing where you get a voiceover the moment you open the game, and I hate that. Let me go and open and close a window or something while the game's loading. I'll happily listen to whatever voiceover you like, just make me press start first. It's also clearly using this time to load, because there's a stutter right before it lets you skip the rest of it, and it feels like you hit a speed bump doing 50. It's this really bad jutter right at the start of the game. We're off to a bad start, folks, I've got to be honest. Glad to say though, a few minutes in and I am not feeling quite so negative. Once I learned who the Adeptus Mechanicus actually were, for one thing. See, they were a Warhammer 40k faction that I'd never really heard of, and I'd originally bought the game on the Switch, believing it could be a potential for my Swindy series, which means all I'd done is read the stuff that was on the eShop. That's the way that series works. But I was excited to find out they're essentially a bunch of transhumanists, which is a phrase that's going to need some explanation for some of you out there. So some of you might be familiar with the expression trans as the T in LGBT, but that's not what transhumanism is, although now that I think about it, there'd be a great essaying where the two of them crossed over. Doesn't matter. Transhumanism. I'm going to break the fourth wall a little bit here. You're about to see a jump cut because I want to read the definition directly from the wiki for you. Okay. So, transhumanism is a philosophical movement that advocates for the transformation of the human condition by developing and making widely available sophisticated technologies which greatly enhance human intellect and psychology. I nailed that in one take. I just want to point that out. Got the skills. Right. Now see, what's awesome about that for me personally is that I'm a bit of a hobbyist on this and I'm 100% in the transhumanist camp. Give me all the upgrades. Outside of Cyberpunk though, it's not something that gets that much representation, especially in video games. Soma is the one game I can think of where this actually got debated as philosophy, and it's what got me reading on the subject in the first place. And here in 40k, it's amazing to see that taken to an extreme, albeit a totalitarian one because that's what 40k is parodying. But we have so many different characters here that have taken divergent paths on the technology they use. The characters themselves are really unique as well. Being technology hunters in an already technologically regressive, fascist, xenophobic theocracy, what they spend most of their time doing is squabbling amongst each other, and it's fantastic. I don't expect you to be a 40k fan coming into this video, so I'm going to explain a little bit about what's actually going on here. See, the humans in 40k are extremely xenophobic and view their own emperor as a god figure. They view anything which isn't human as blasphemous. But they've undergone a great cataclysm which led to some deliberate technological regression, but some non-deliberate as well. This means that while they're looking for technology out there, anything they find which is alien technology or viewed to be slightly alien will automatically get them accused of being the equivalent of witches. The Salem folks had nothing on this going on for 40,000 years. And honestly, in Mechanicus, but in a lot of 40k games, that kind of finger-pointing and everyone treading on eggshells between finding this new technology and being considered heretics is where the writing truly shines forth. It's the part of the games I really enjoy. The villains this time around I am a little bit less bothered by though. I'm probably about to annoy somebody with my 40k lore here, which I may have done already, it occurs to me. But the Necron, who are the enemies here, seem to be this cross between kind of technological zombies and the Borg. Using a planet-sized tomb of theirs as a setting works really, really well, but the enemies themselves are just not as interesting as the protagonists. Which makes it even more of a shame that only the main bosses in the game get voice acting. This is a mid-range price title, albeit at the upper end of that spectrum at $40, and voice acting's never a given with those, but I feel it actively hurts things here. You may notice I've stayed away from naming individual characters while I've been talking about the plot here. That's because I've only ever seen them written down, and I don't much fancy learning Latin to make sure I get the pronunciation correct. I'm in enough trouble with the 40k fans, I imagine, at this point, for some of my lore descriptions being so simplified. So, yeah, I'm not going to give you the name of these characters. You'd be hearing a lot more about them if they were voiced. It's just how it is. Right, so, I should probably be segueing into this, but the hell with it. The soundtrack of this game's nothing short of amazing. Let's have a listen here. Wasn't that great? Something I've discovered since I've started reviewing things is that I love music being used sort of as a sound effect. That sort of auditory onomatopoeia. In fact, the first place I think I can recall hearing it was the Heat Ray track on Jeff Wayne's War of the Worlds album, which is like the second or third time I brought that album up in a review. Future Ayana. Note on the ship's log. At some point, we're going to review the musical album for War of the Worlds. Thank you, sweetie. Anyway, I often say that some of the great music I've been hearing since doing these reviews is going to end up on my Spotify playlist. But we have a first here. I've been listening to this soundtrack since weeks before I started actually playing the game. I cannot recommend it enough. This is such an amazing soundtrack, it really is. So I reckon when I edit this down, we're probably like 5 or 6 minutes into the review here. Should I maybe start talking about Mechanicus and how it plays? I think I should start talking about Mechanicus and how it plays. Let's get started. So as I mentioned, the game takes place largely inside the tombs of the Necron you found on this remote planet you visited, and your missions vary between investigating the tomb and finding ways of destroying it, and protecting yourself from being corrupted by it, of course, all of which depends on who it is you're actually taking missions from, which is your choice. There's even a couple of missions where you're asked to do stuff like go and put in speakers so they can broadcast prayers into the tomb, or maybe take some incense around and burn it to keep away the miasma and filth of the alien. I love how insane that is as a concept, it's brilliant. The game proper is split between 2 modes. One is a cross between Darkest Dungeon and those awesome choose-your-own-adventure books I really hope everyone still remembers. You can't put your finger in the page this time and check ahead either, and some of these consequences are actually really, really harsh. The reward can either be Blackstone, which is the game's leveling resource, a boost going into your next combat encounter, or a decrementation of the dungeon timer, which is something we'll discuss more in a second. There's some great lore and some great characterization of the tomb itself in the written descriptions you get with these decisions. All the writing in this game is top-notch, it absolutely is, even though it's a little bit wordy at times. I absolutely adore the dungeon timer mechanic in this game as well. So it's based around the concept that every single turn where you do something, the Necron become a little bit more aware that there's something that doesn't belong. The stench of life has entered their tomb. And they get options like having more Necrons in the next combat encounter, or they reanimate faster, which is something again we'll talk about in just a second, or they get to act first in combat, which can be really, really devastating. All of this encourages you to plan your route through each mission really, really carefully. Although I will say the pros highly outweigh the stuff you miss if you just go straight for the objective markers. Not least because in addition to the per mission dungeon timer, there's a global one that decides when the end of the game is going to happen. A bit of potential extra Blackstone often just isn't worth it. It's a shame because it wouldn't have needed too much tweaking to make the rewards just that tiny bit better, but as it is, you are better off taking the John Cleese approach from Monty Python and the Holy Grail. When you encounter the combat sections I was referring to though, the game changes almost entirely and you're brought into an XCOM style turn-based strategy shooter. Don't go thinking you are playing XCOM though, there's a lot of different and very interesting stuff going on here. First off, the game has done away with the idea of cover mechanics, which I do not miss one bit. Nothing like being point blank range on an enemy and then missing because you rolled poorly on that 90% chance to hit. There is a bit of RNG still, but it's only in the values of the actual damage you do, not in the hits you make. Making up for that is the game's resource management system, which is called cognition points. These are gained essentially for looking at shiny things or anything that's interesting, either yourself or by sending a little scout robot. Later on, you can also gain them by taking damage, getting kills, or even watching others take damage, which I love as this concept of just how expendable and cannon foddery some units are. Like any good resource management system, at the start of the game, you have got to keep an eye on those cognition points. Anything other than the most basic gun needs at least one of them to fire, any movement beyond an extremely limited range per character needs at least one of them, and you only get 4 total to start off with. Also, if you shoot a Necron and it appears to be dead, you need to shoot it again. Otherwise, after a few turns, it uses what it calls its reanimation protocol, and it can get right back in the fight. All of this means you really need to carefully plan just how strategically you're going to be using those cognition points. At first. It's here that we come to the game's first real issue. It has a negative difficulty curve. Your characters gain levels and equipment as you complete missions, and that means you can do more damage, you can give heals, you can gain more cognition points, and by the time you're a few hours in, there just really isn't much of a challenge going on. I'd gone from Dark Souls to Hello Kitty Island adventure. Now it does appear the developers are aware of this, because, and I'm told these were patched in after the initial release, there is a huge suite of modifiers that I could use to tweak things, make certain things harder, certain things easier, but is it really my job to stop the gameplay and go and fix the difficulty curve? It's a shame too, because the leveling and item systems otherwise are actually pretty great, and would offer great replayability. As ever, there is one exception to the difficulty rule, and it's from the Heretic DLC, which is bundled in with the Switch. It's kind of the problem really, actually. There is no indication to you that these missions are DLC missions, and if you were playing them when you'd maybe played through most of the game and were then trying the DLC, that would be fine. But they're just marked as easy along with all of the other easy missions. I went into it and got my ass utterly handed to me. Had I not had a load that was before I started that mission, I might even have had to restart the game because I just couldn't get through it, and I would have been a very, very unhappy princess. While we are doing negatives, the game has some really weird performance issues. I was playing on Switch, as I mentioned, and slowdown happened later on when the screen was really, really crowded, which I sort of expected at this point. It's a little bit of a pain and the inputs were getting quite laggy, but it's a turn-based game, so it wasn't that major an issue. That's when I discovered something really, really weird, though. Yeah, the game runs better when the Switch isn't docked, which is a first for me, if I'm honest. I even tried redocking the Switch and then setting it to run at 720p, because I know that's what the screen on the Switch itself runs at, but nope, didn't make a difference. The game just performs better when the Switch isn't in its dock. I'd be playing the Twilight Zone music here, but honestly, I don't even know if I'm going to get away with the Holy Grail clip, so let's not try copyrighted music, shall we? Moving on. The negatives aside, though, I really enjoyed Mechanicus. It introduced me to a part of 40k lore that I wasn't previously familiar with, and I want to know more about it. And I wonder if that's what Games Workshop are trying to do when they give the licenses out to these smaller companies. If so, it's working really, really well. I'm looking forward to replaying the game as well. I'll probably wait till I've got like a long haul flight or something and just grind out the missions, trying some different strategies in each one. If you are looking for a really good turn-based strategy, or just something well written in a completely different environment to one you're used to, definitely give Mechanicus a look. Can't recommend it enough. Anyway, folks, thank you for watching. I will see you all next week. We will be starting our 2-part Dawn of War retrospective, taking a look at Dawn of War 1 and 2. Looking forward to it. See you all there. Peace. I'm out.